again, and welcome back to Wine 101 on the road. I'm Scott Sullivan. I'm going to be your host again today, and we are here at one of the historic and the namesake wineries in this area of the Central Coast. We're at Sanford Winery today, and I'm honored to be in the company of Steve Fennell.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that.
So Steve, for our audience, please just give us a little background of yourself and how you came to be here, and then once we know you, we'll talk about this historic and like I said, this winery of notoriety.
Well, that sounds great. So I came here a little over 8.5 years ago, and in many ways I kind of came in a full circle. I fell in love with wine in this area. I was an undergraduate at UC Santa Barbara studying geology and geography, and once I really started tasting wines and realizing I had a palate and a passion for wine and a good background in science, also in agriculture, I realized I liked wine more than rocks and pursued that passion, went to UC Davis for graduate school, worked in Napa for about 13 years, a little bit in Australia, and then had the wonderful opportunity to come back down here. The Terlatos have been involved with Sanford Winery since 2002, and they brought me down in early 2006 to be the winemaker and general manager. So I was extremely pleased to get that opportunity.
And things are going well, as we can tell, and then we can see wine placements in Arizona and so forth. Most people are familiar with the Sanford name. But tell us a little bit about you're talking about geology, but the geography, the location of this area, and the winery, its history.
Absolutely. This is a truly amazing region, the Santa Rita Hills. We're right in the heart, the true center of the Santa Rita Hills. And this is the western part of Santa Barbara County, and then more specifically the western part of the San Ynez Valley. And what's remarkable about this area, it really is the geography. It's the transverse ranges. So you think of the western hemisphere from the tip of South America all the way up to Alaska. Generally speaking, the coastline runs south to north, and so do the mountain ranges, both coastal hills and farther inland. There are a few places, however, that it juts out to the west, and it's oriented, about 90 degrees off of that. But the San Ynez Valley is actually the longest transverse valley in the entire span of the Western Hemisphere. Wow. And what's significant about it is, the Pacific Ocean is quite cool, even in the middle of the summer, and our valley opens directly to the ocean on the west. So we get a very distinct cooling influence off the Pacific Ocean. And even though we're inland about 16 miles, that effect is dramatic, and it keeps the daytime temperatures quite low. So right now we're actually experiencing some fairly warm weather for our standards, but it's warm in, say, high 70s to low 80s. Yeah, you travel inland 20-25 miles, it's 25 plus degrees warmer. So it's really what makes this area special, and especially suited to very cool climate grapes such as Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, which is what we grow.
And is that when Sanford first started, when this thing evolved, was what, 30, 40 years ago?
Yeah, it started actually at the late 60s. A gentleman named Michael Benedict and a partner, Richard Sanford, kind of hatched the seemingly crazy idea at the time, which is to find a truly cool climate location that they could just, doing the right methods in the vineyard, just barely ripen the fruit. Not over-ripen it, but just barely ripen it. So they did a lot of work looking for climates that could possibly deliver that, a combination of soil and the right climate, and they sort of found this location. Now, this had never been planted to wine grapes before. It was, it was pretty heavily agriculture we planted, but there was never, I don't think anyone really thought about wine grapes before that point. There was lima beans, there was wheat, barley, vegetables, lots of things, but it was considered far too cool to plant wine grapes. And Michael Benedict's told me in the last few years something that I got quite a kick out of it, is once they found the location and they were committed to planting a vineyard, they didn't know what would necessarily perform best. Fortunately, they had success in the end with Pinot and Chardonnay, but there really wasn't a whole lot known, late 60s, about what grew best in different parts of California. So they reached out to UC Davis for advice, and the advice they got was to not plant anything because it'll never ripen, and certainly not reds. That was basically the warning they got, and fortunately they were stubborn and didn't listen to them, and planted a variety of things, including Pinot and Chardonnay, and those have really succeeded. That was the original vineyard, Sanford and Benedict, named after the two partners, and we still have that vineyard. And it's the oldest vineyard in this whole region. It's also Santa Barbara County's oldest Pinot Noir vines, planted in 1971.
1971. And so have they ever been uprooted, or those are that old?
Much of the original planting is still there. That vineyard is now about half old vine and half replanted. So the Trelato family bought the vineyard in 2008 after many, many years of Sanford Winery purchasing fruit from that vineyard, just like other producers did. Not only was there not common ownership, but there wasn't actually the control over it. So, they made the significant investment in 2007 to purchase, and what we did really that first year was go through the vineyard block by block and identify what was healthy, what could survive and stay in the ground for years to come, and what really was compromised, mainly due to virus, the leaf roll virus that had been there for a while, and basically on a block by block made decisions based on quality, really wine quality, because we had wines from the different blocks. So we started a replanting program.
Okay.
But the great thing is we've gone through actually 3 different phases of beginning replants, and we're at a point now where the old vines which are left are quite healthy. So they're 43 years old now, and they could grow another 43 years or longer.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about that Sanford and Benedict being the first vineyard, but also being kind of the keynote of this whole valley. One of the most recognizable names if you look for single vineyard stuff. You mentioned leaf roll. So that's a virus, but it's transmitted or it's spread by some insect.
It can be. It can also just come in on the cuttings. Now, very often when people plant new vineyards, they'll get cuttings from nurseries that are certified. They've gone through an import program where they're tested for virus, and then they're planted and they're evaluated over time. So most people are getting pretty clean cuttings now. That wasn't so much the case in the early 70s. So I think there was some virus that probably came in with the selections they took, and it does spread. It can spread. There are insects that can spread it.
So these are certified vines. Is there a certain clone? Because are they all one clone, or are there different clones in that area, in that vineyard?
There's definitely different clones. Even the original planting, I think there are 2 different clones of Pinot Noir, and they're distinctly different. And the Chardonnay, which is interesting, actually I was talking to Michael Benedict just yesterday about this. There were 2 Chardonnay blocks basically planted that are contiguous. They're separated by a vineyard avenue, and it was really seen to be one block. And the cuttings were taken from Wente Brothers' first vineyard in Monterey County in Arroyo Seco. That was planted, I think, in 1969. I want to say. And they got cuttings from that. What was basically what Carl Wente thought was his best selection of Chardonnay, and so I think he took cuttings from one of his vineyard and gathered them, and that was what was used to plant at Sanford and Benedict. But what we have noticed through tasting in the vineyard is there's at least 2 different selections there. So I think it was just sort of a field blend. Whether Wente knew that at the beginning or not, or they got mixed up at some place. But every 10th vine or so is quite different, with a much more of a perfumey muscat quality.
So now when I have a bottle of Pinot and it's Santa Rita Hills or San Ynez, there's a distinction. It's kind of like having Carneros or something that it's unique to itself. There are variations within it, but it's pretty much, you can tell it's from this area. So is that a process of your blend and just making it over and over long enough, or does there actually an evolution occur within the vine that it actually becomes kind of a clone more native to this area over time?
I think it's really a reflection of the combination of the climate, which is probably the biggest driver, and the soils. Because we have I mean, back to clones, we have 15 different clones of Pinot Noir planted between La Rinconada, which is a vineyard I haven't mentioned yet, but this is what surrounds the winery, and it's up on the hillside to the east as well, and then which is all planted in 1997, and then Sanford and Benedict, the original vineyard from the early 70s. So 15 clones planted across this vineyard, these two vineyards. You know, they're certainly different. We see differences with the various clones, but there's a consistency that comes across, and I think that is really the Santa Rita Hills, and it's caused by the very cool climate, again because of that coastal influence, but it's also remarkable because of our latitude, because we're at a pretty low latitude, much farther south than the north coast, of course, certainly more than Oregon or Burgundy. And the result is we have a pretty mild winter, and we get very early bud break. So our vines will start growing, say, a month before they would, potentially in Napa, Sonoma, certainly Oregon or Burgundy. But then we get a cool spring and typically a cool summer. So we are also often picking after they are. So we get on average a month to, say, 5 weeks longer of an actual growing season. So we get full ripeness, which comes along with flavor, with tannin development in the Pinot Noir. But with that cool climate, we get great acidity, great structure. We can still have balanced wines. With the soils, this was all a marine terrace that was uplifted. So there's a lot of weathered shale, some diatomaceous earth, some fantastic soils for growing Pinot. So I think those two things are really major factors. The other thing is, I think the breeze. Sometimes it's more than a breeze. It can be a wind coming out of the west, right off the ocean. And I think that can lead to a little bit of a kind of a spice character.
Sure.
I think parts of the world that get kind of sustained winds and reds can kind of have a little bit of a peppery note. And then we see that in a Pinot.
So if you were going to define, and I know single vineyards have their own nuance, but if you were going to define this area's Pinot or Sanford's Pinot, tell me in a broad term, what's the style of these valleys, these hills, and your wine in particular?
I think the one term that I always come back to is balance. I mean, it's something that's used a lot, and it means different things to different people. But I think there is really something to it here in the sense of, again, there's full ripeness, which is, combination of fruit flavor, but there's also structure. There's weight to the wines. There's great acidity, which makes them, easy to pair with foods. It also gives them ageability. So I think there is just sort of a natural balance here. I mean, Pinot Noirs around the world can vary, as you know, from, big extracted, kind of fruit bombs to, really light, very delicate wines. And I think the Santa Rita Hills strikes this balance of, weight and potentially some power and ageability, but there's also, I think, a grace and an elegance to the wine.
I think I agree, and people go through an evolution where they'll start, and most people like sweet wines to begin with their wine drinking career, if you want to call it that. And the same with Pinots. You might start with a big fruit bomb type of high production Pinot, but then you work your way through and you find these niches, you find these dips and hills, and I really am at that point where these Central Coast, and especially in this area, these Pinot Noirs, they have all the flavor, they have all the structure, they have a little bite, that nice spice, garrigue, whatever you want to call it, but they're not cloying, they're not jammy and over the top either, so they're this perfect blend. So you can drink it by itself, you can drink it with just a myriad of different types of food, and we're talking, what's your favorite dish?
Oh, here it's a pretty big range, and I think with the Pinots, the structure they have, I think they do well with, they do really well with beef, and just, beautiful filet. Even a Rinconada Pinot and lamb is a gorgeous combination. Roast pork. I just ate lunch, and now I'm getting
roast
hungry.
pork. We talked about earlier today, we talked a little bit of roast duck. We talked about grilled salmon. We even talked about some Thai food, because that spice of the food, there's a thing where it's either like for like, similar characteristics that blend well,
Sure.
or opposites, sweet to spicy, that type of thing. And so we find that these Pinots here are just a perfect balance, like you say. I think that's a good term for it.
Indeed, and I think the one thing Santa Rita Hills Pinots have that Burgundy certainly has, but not a whole lot of California regions can say this, is Pinot with some real tannin structure. I mean, there's weight, there's great acidity, which is, of course, something you kind of should expect in Pinot Noir. But there's also a tannin framework, and it does enable it to pair with foods that people may not think about, like beef. I mean, I actually think Pinots from here very often are better complements to beef than, say, a Cabernet Sauvignon, because we have this combination of tannin and acid that really kind of helps cut through the protein and fat. Whereas sometimes, like a big cab, it's almost like you have two big things. You've got, you know, heavy. You may have a steak, a big heavy steak, and a big heavy cab.
Yeah.
And you know they're filling. Whereas
Exactly.
Pinot kind of just cuts
Exactly.
it and blends perfectly.
No, I agree. I think that's a good assessment. So we're standing here, and I am telling you, Sanford is recognized, and you see the wine label, so you know that the label means something. But there's been some changes here. There's been some transitions. So from the two gentlemen that started growing Pinot back in the late 60s, early 70s, or thinking about it, geologists, I think, or at least one of them was. What's the evolution now? Who has traded hands, and how big is it now?
Yeah, it's definitely been, it's changed. It's been an evolution more than anything, because I think even in those early years there was an evolution. I mean, it started as a partnership with Richard Sanford and Michael Benedict, and there were other partners, you know, sort of more financial partners. And then when the two of them split, and Michael Benedict and partners kept the Sanford and Benedict Vineyard for from 1980 till about 1990, Richard Sanford left and started Sanford Winery, and that was a partnership as well. And then, so that's kind of the first two chapters, and then the sort of the third chapter is with the Terlados becoming partners, and then, you know, becoming you know, management ownership of the winery in the mid 2000s. And so that really is, you know, that kind of evolution. In terms of size, it's actually been pretty consistent. You know, it's kind of ebbed and flowed with vintages, as they do in terms of production. But our estate wines are actually, you know, pretty stable in terms of our volume. I think because Sanford has been around for some decades and has kind of national exposure and distribution, there is a perception that it's a larger brand than it is, and it really isn't. Our total production is, you know, for the estate wines is actually 20 to 25,000 cases, and, you know, we have a second label, if you will, called Florida Campo, which we're quite proud of. And between those two, I mean, we're in the 30 to 40,000 case range, which really isn't. Sounds like a lot of wine, but it really isn't.
No, not on the world scale, for sure.
Indeed. So, you know, one thing that we've really worked on, you know, the last few years is just integrating the vineyard operations in the winery. Where, you know, for years a vineyard management team, a vineyard management company was used in the vineyard, and it was sort of directed by employees here. But now it's all in-house. We have our own vineyard manager, and basically everyone who works in the vineyard is a Sanford employee. So there's, you know, really good morale, and everyone's kind of, you know, working for the same goal.
Yeah,
to grow and make the best
living the
wines
life,
possible.
living the dream, working in a winery. So we've talked about the Pinot, and you mentioned just for a little bit the Chardonnay. So tell us a little bit what about your Chardonnay single vineyard stuff, bigger production stuff, or
sure.
if you make stainless, if you make oaked.
So we have a few different Chardonnays that we produce. Now these are all estate wines. So Santa Rita Hills, our Santa Rita Hills bottling, which is the one with the flowers on the label, the California Goldenrod. That's a blend of the two vineyards, primarily La Rinconada, but also some Sanford and Benedict Old Vine Chardonnay, planted the same year as the Pinot, so over 40 years old.
Wow.
Those are all barrel fermented, all French oak. In terms of the new oak percentage, however, we're pretty careful. It's usually around 20, the most maybe 25% new oak for that wine. So we really want the kind of more of the citrus fruit quality that's in Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay, and the distinct minerality, which is quite unique to this area, to be more prominent. The oak is more supporting. As a wine producer, I really believe that for cool climate Chardonnays, that barrel fermentation really brings something to it that you can't really emulate with stainless steel. I think there's a lot of different wines out there that are beautifully done in stainless steel, but I find there's something about Chardonnay that just becomes a more complete wine in terms of texture and whatnot. But we do a single vineyard, La Rinconada. We actually just bottled a Sanford and Benedict Chardonnay that's not released yet. We did this last year. And we even have a single block Chardonnay from this property that's a tiny production, a few barrels of wine. So Yeah, the Chardonnay in this region and absolutely on our vineyards, I think is on par with the Pinot. Pinot's gotten a lot more attention, certainly since that one movie. You know, the Chardonnays here are delicious.
They are, no doubt. And now, is that the only two, or what else do you do?
That's the only two we grow on Sanford and La Rinconada. We also have a little bit of Viognier planted at Sanford and Benedict, which is quite interesting. It's you know, cool climate Viognier is quite different than a lot of what's planted, which tends to be in the warmer areas. And with cool climate Viognier, you get some of the nice perfume, the floral, and the, you know, the kind of stone fruit qualities, but it's not over the top in terms of aromatics. And it has good acidity and some weight on the palate, but not too much. To me, some Viogniers can be kind of like drinking perfume. They can just be so heavy and almost cloying. Whereas with a cool climate Viognier here, it's a little more like a northern white Rhone. It has a little more of that kind of quality, sort of like, you know, stone fruits, but also, you know, a little bit flowery, but not, you know, not like walking into a perfume store.
No doubt.
And then we buy a few little things for the taste room, a little Sauvignon Blanc. And,
yeah, they have a wonderful tasting room right on site, which anymore is getting to be the exception, not the norm. We have a lot of places that have gone to a common area, say Los Olivos up the road, and where there's lots of tasting room, and then you leave them alone at the winery. But this is cool because you come out here and you get to taste the wines, but right behind us, as you could hear the forklift earlier, there's production going on, and it's an active working winery, so there's a different feel. It's not storefront or big box kind of a feel, so it's nice. Now, how old are these buildings? They look like they're built in an old style, but they look pretty modern to me.
Sure. So we have two complexes here. The winery building, which is really kind of all of our production, from the crush area to the tanks that you see to my left, across the courtyard into the larger building, where we have some storage tanks. We also have 2 barrel rooms that flank both sides. That was completed in 2001. So, you know, the brand had been around for 20 years before this was completed. The wines had been made in just leased warehouse spaces for years. But, you know, this vineyard was planted in '97 with the plan of building that winery. So it kind of tied everything together. You know, it absolutely is an old style. It's the old mission style.
Yeah.
You know, the inspiration for it, I believe, was, you know, certainly all of the old California missions, but in particular, there's one nearby, the Mission La Purissima, just outside of Lompoc, which is, I believe, the most restored, or the most pristinely restored of all the California missions. Truly beautiful place. So, you know, it just kind of speaks to old California. Now, the tasting room building was also originally planned as part of this, but it was delayed somewhat, and this was started in 2006 and completed in 2007. So that's kind of brought everything together. And what we wanted to do with this building is, I mean, I got to be involved with this, which was a really fun project. The winery building was done before I came on board, but this building just ahead of me, in front of me, was something I got to be part of. And, you know, we really wanted to bring something that was, you know, very fitting with the winery and the setting and the place, but also to be comfortable, but, you know, rustic, but elegant at the same time. And John Terlato, one of the owners, is passionate about architecture, and he got involved and was actually very, very helpful in kind of finishing the design of this.
Well, that's great, and it's a feel rather than just you know, an appearance. It's the whole 9 yards, and we really enjoy coming out here. And I look at all these vines, and I know because we had a hot year, a lot of the grapes have been picked.
Yeah, we had a very early year. I think this is probably the earliest year on record for harvest for us. We're nearing completion. We actually picked our last Chardonnay today. We have just a little bit more Pinot to go. This is, you know, and it's barely into the second half of September.
And so, opposed to just from 1 year ago, what's the difference?
We're 3 weeks or so ahead of normal.
3 weeks. So you guys have to wait for the vineyard to speak to you. It's not like, okay, in August we got to hire this many guys. We know what our schedule is. It's, you have to wait. So what do you do as far as staffing that? How do you come up with enough people to get it done when it needs to be done?
It's a good challenge every year. So we have a small full-time crew that works year-round on the 2 vineyards. They're doing different things throughout the year, from pruning to canopy management to disking to hedging to all sorts of things, including driving tractors and helping to pick during harvest. But for the busy times, especially during harvest, we certainly need to hire additional people. And we start that process pretty early, some months before harvest, trying to get as many people on board that look like they're good workers who are interested in working, and we try to get them kind of officially in our system as soon as possible, and then checking legality and all that kind of stuff that we have to do as good employers. But we have to do it early, and then we, depending on the year, it could be sort of a kind of a drawn out harvest where we're not bringing in very much every day if we're lucky with weather, or it could be a little more condensed where we need more bodies to harvest. This year was kind of medium. Last year was really just perfectly paced and kind of slow, but that was good from our end, over the course of about five and a half weeks. This year it was compressed by a couple weeks, but we had a really great team out there, so it's something you kind of have to plan for it. But
yeah, no, it's a juggling act, I tell you. We talk to everybody, we travel, and every time we're going, oh my goodness, this is not a normal, casual, let's lay back and have a winery. This is a big deal, and it's a complicated business. I'm looking out here, and I forgot to ask you, how many acres do you have here? This is a lot of vines.
Yeah, it is. So this is the Rinconada Vineyard, as I said, I think before. And it includes the flats here, also includes the hillside, and much of it you can't see. It's actually over the ridge facing east. And we have 116 acres planted here, and about 144 at Sanford and Benedict. So between the two, pretty close to 260.
Wow.
What's great though is that it's all kind of close together.
Sure.
It's
surrounds the vineyard like the old days. If you need any more information, you can certainly look up Sanford, and you can certainly call and find out about the products that are available in your area and stuff, but I really recommend you do it. And Steve Fennell, I appreciate your time very much. We know it's harvest, and we know you're busy, and we just love bringing this to the folks back home, and streaming also on Access 13. You can see it just about anywhere nowadays. So thank you very much again.
Pleasure,
We'd also
Scott.
like to thank the Telados, the Sanford organization, or the group as a whole, for maintaining a true piece of history here in this area, and a wonderful site, and a great wine.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. And we'll see you down the road.